Welcome to the Sons of Mjolnir podcast.
The Sons of... what?
This isn't your Sons of Macaroni, yeah!
The Sons of Mjolnir?
This is Sons of Mjolnir, yeah!
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Sons of Mjolnir. As always, I am one of your hosts, Fat Thor. Unfortunately, it's just going to be me today. Cap and Gorgon are off saving the world, but I am going to be joined by the wonderful, the amazing David Pepose, friend of the show. We had him on here a couple months ago. He was actually our first interview that we ever did. David, thank you so much for coming and nerding out with me today. It's a pleasure to have you back.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be back. Thanks so much for having me. And yeah, man, I'm excited to catch up. We've announced a few new books since the last time you and I spoke, and yeah, excited to talk about all things Moon Knight, City of the Dead, our brand new Punisher run, and my upcoming Mad Cave book, The Devil That Wears My Face.
Yes. I was going to say, in that time, you've been a very, very busy man. The last time we talked, I think it was right before the last issue of Savage Avengers dropped. So we were right in the midst of Savage Avengers. And like you said, since then, you've been working on a lot of stuff. We got a lot of stuff to talk about. But first, before we get into all that, I do want to quickly mention and talk about, so our last conversation, you were kind of teasing us a little bit and you were like, man, I'd really love to write a horror book. Like that's one of the books I really want to dip my toes in the horror genre. And so a couple months later, it might have even been a couple weeks later, you announced your Hulk Annual. And the Hulk Annual, that was a total kind of horror take on the Incredible Hulk. For the listeners and watchers out there that listen to us, they know that we were really big fans of the Donny Cates Hulk run. So coming off the heels of that, when we heard that you were writing it, me and Gorgon were like, oh my God, no way. Everything's happening. The stars are aligning. So can we talk a little bit about the Hulk before we get into the other stuff? Because I really loved that issue. I loved you described it as it was like the Blair Witch Project meets the Hulk, which I just thought, as soon as I heard that concept, I'm like, oh my God, that's genius. And it also, I think, in my opinion, was the perfect jumping off point to the new Incredible Hulk run that's going to be written by Philip Kennedy Johnson, which is also really, really great. So can you talk about what it was like to kind of bridge those two runs together and flex your horror muscles on that?
Yeah, well, that annual was it came together in an interesting way. Will Moss, the editor on Hulk, he and I had been talking for a little bit about a possible project, and I gave him kind of a big pitch, and it didn't wind up materializing, but I think Will was kind enough to remember me. And so when they were wrapping up on Hulk ahead of Philip Kennedy Johnson's run, and Philip and I are buddies, and so Philip and I were actually talking about my project that didn't materialize while he was working on his outline for Hulk. And so we were kind of giving each other notes on that. And so Will hit me up and said, hey, like we're doing an annual for Hulk. Would you like to throw in? And it was around the holidays of 2022. I was pitched on Hulk Annual, Spider-Verse Unlimited. I did a short story in that, Darth Vader, Black, White, and Red, and then Extreme Venomverse. So I was kind of juggling all four of those projects at the same time. But Hulk, when he hit me up, he said, okay, you've got, I think it was 25 pages, a little bit longer than the norm. And it's, it's self-contained, one shot. We're trying not to, kind of put too firm of a time peg on anything, just because like we don't want to flub up what Donnie and Ryan Otley are doing on their run, but also we don't want to like hamstring anything that Philip is doing. And so the Hulk is a character that's always intimidated me. When I was a kid, my parents got me 4 Marvel books that really kind of started my comics journey. There was an issue of Amazing Spider-Man, an issue of Captain America, an issue of Silver Surfer that Silver Surfer did not appear in. It was Drax the Destroyer versus Adam Warlock. And then an issue of Hulk. And the Hulk issue I always referred to as the scary book. It was he'd been poisoned, and so he was having like heart palpitations And meanwhile, he's fighting the Abomination, and he winds up like pouring toxic waste on the Abomination's face. That's like one of my first comics. Okay.
Yeah.
And so that one was like the one I probably read the least because it, kind of spooked me as a kid. And I think as I've grown up, I think I always felt like the Hulk strikes me as such a broad character. He represents kind of one of those core emotions in the human experience, but one that's kind of hard to define. When you get angry, it really blinds you. It's like staring into the sun. And so I think those qualities combined with just the fact that like, you could do Smart Hulk, or you could do, but like the Hulk's general levels of articulation are, much more limited than most other characters. So I remember telling my fiance that, she always asks me like, oh, what's the character that you'd have like the most difficult time writing? And I always tell her, and then within like 2 or 3 months, I'm usually asked to write that character.
Yeah.
And so when Will asked me to write the Hulk, I thought, how do I get myself an emotional remove? How do I sort of give myself a barrier that I can kind of, the sunglasses before you stare into the sun, narratively speaking. And I'd been thinking for a long time that I'd wanted to do a found footage comic. It's just like a cool genre. It's a cool way of like of structuring a movie.
So startled.
And I've always wanted to see, is there a way you could do it for a comic? And it's tough because, it's like, do you do it as a graphic novel, and then you really are kind of like, it's high risk, maybe high reward. Or do you do it over the course of single issues, in which case like the illusion gets broken over the course of a month? A standalone story with an extra runway felt like the perfect opportunity to do this. And I pitched Will. I'd said, there are storm chasers out there. What if we did a found footage story with Hulk chasers? And as the story kind of came together, it really spoke to a lot of things that I've experienced in my life. My first job out of college, I was a newspaper reporter, Berkshire County, Massachusetts. And for those who aren't familiar with the place, it really is it's a study in duality. There's a lot of rich people's vacation homes, from the Northeast, but also just like the locals. Like there's just dire abject poverty, and sometimes you just walk a couple of blocks and you shift between the two. And Pittsfield, Massachusetts, especially, which was kind of the hub of the county, they were a GE town. General Electric had I believe their headquarters there, and they eventually moved out. And when I moved to Pittsfield, people were still saying, when GE comes back, when GE comes back, the economy will come back. And that was kind of an ongoing identity crisis for the whole county. It was just, what do we do? This was our identity for so long. And so that became, I think, the backbone of what we called the Viridian Project. It's Los Diablos Missile Base was the home of the Hulk. What happens to the civilian annex that was connected to this military base? And what happens when the military base just shuts down overnight because of the Hulk? These people are kind of looking for really anything to help them survive. And we were able to kind of tie that in with like an environmental bent, saying that they had resorted to gamma fracking, and sort of the environmental costs of that, bringing in the Mole Man and his creatures that have all been like slowly driven insane by.
Yes, I loved that. I love that. And that's, you're talking about, bringing back the missile base and Mole Man. That was one of the things I really loved about this issue is, and this is something that you do very well. You did it in Savage Avengers. I see that you're doing it in Moon Knight currently, is that you're very good at, picking little pieces from a character's history or even the Marvel universe as a whole, and, using that to not rehash things, but, bring something new to the table. And I just thought bringing Hulk back to the missile base, which is like, I haven't even thought about that in years. I mean, I think a lot of people, it's like you said, Hulk, he gets angry, and that's kind of what we think of, but we forget his, basic origin. And bringing back what's the monster,
Giganto.
Yeah, like that was so, I thought, so cool. And
thank you.
I think one of the things I said in my review, which you could tell me if this was kind of intentional or not, I thought it was really cool in the kind of more poetic sense of Fantastic Four, obviously Marvel's first family, they kind of kicked off the Marvel boom and kind of gave birth to
Yeah.
all of this stuff. And in that first issue, they face Gigantor, sorry.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was really cool that, after Donny Cates and Ryan Ottley's run, it was clear that we were kind of going into a new era for the Incredible Hulk. And it felt just very fitting that to bring us into this new era to use kind of an OG Marvel monster. Because for people out there that are reading Phillips' run, it's all about monsters and all about, the horror of it all. So again, was that kind of an intentional thing, or did that kind of just work out that way?
Well, for me, I love Marvel monsters in general, and really any opportunity I have to try to throw in like a giant monster, I try to do it in my Marvel work. I mean, I did it in Savage Avengers with Devil Dinosaur. I've done it in Moon Knight with Amit the Devourer. I did it with this Hulk thing with Giganto. I did it with the Tri-Sentinel in Avengers Unlimited and Ego the Living Planet. So like I do have like a soft spot for those kinds of characters. And yeah, I was thinking at the time, I was just like, Cloverfield was like a big influence besides Blair Witch Project. And so just thinking like, okay, what's like the equivalent of like a kaiju fight in the Marvel universe and with the Hulk. And so Giganto was very much up there on the list. And honestly, the way that Giganto came into being was it was really trying to figure out the way to play with the structure. With this found footage concept, everything's through the lens of the camera. And so I wanted to play around with like the characters having to move from point A to point B. And I loved the idea of kind of depicting a car wreck from the inside. That's something I've really wanted to do for a long time. I remember I got into a very bad car wreck as a kid, and that was sort of like one of my deepest, darkest fears for a long time. And so the idea of like having to portray that in like, you can't look away. It doesn't like you linger on this. And so I thought, oh, a cool way to do that is like, if like during the kaiju fight, some like the ground literally opens up and their car falls into it. So I was thinking, how do I do the vertical aspect of this? And that made me think of the Mole Man. And that made me think of the Moloids. And I was like, oh, well, he's got a kaiju. He's got Giganto. And so it worked out really well. And I want to give a shout out to Philip as well, because the guy is a consummate team player. He was going to do a 5-page backup, kind of teasing into his run. And he and I were talking, and I was like, oh, I just, I had this idea with Giganto. And so this is what I was planning on doing. And he was like, oh, that's really good to know. And so then he tailored his 5-page backup to kind of take those threads that I had dropped of the Hulk dispatching Giganto, we'll say, which I remember asking Will, like, oh, like, am I allowed to get away with this? And or just, are there multiple Gigantos out there? Those are the sorts of questions.
True.
Or does he have a healing factor? And so I think Philip really kind of took the ball and ran with it in a really cool way. But yeah, I'm really happy with how that issue came together. Kaio Mahato took a very technically challenging script, and I think did a really good job with it. And Edgar Delgado, our colorist, also deserves a lot of praise, because he really, there were a lot of effects that I was like, let's add in distortion, let's add in some noise, let's add in all these things. And Edgar was really kind of the guy behind all that. And, so he took what would have otherwise looked very much like a mainstream normal comic, and was able to kind of really help sell the concept, and make this look very different than anything else that you'd find on the stands that month.
Yeah, I mean, I really loved it. And like I said, it was the perfect, like I said, cap off of the Cates run and beginning of the Phillip run. And like you said, his little 5-page thing at the end, I'm just like, okay, we're getting into it. And just a little side note, saw each other at Comic-Con, and I actually got to ask a question in your guys' panel. And I could listen to that dude talk about mythology and like horror all day long. Like, the way he talks about the new Hulk, and even when I asked you guys kind of similar question to what we were just talking about. But like I said, man, I could listen to that dude talk about that stuff all day long.
Philip is a very smart guy.
Yeah.
I can't say any good things about him. He's genuinely the nicest person I know in the industry. And just, a real stand-up guy. I've always said that it's very fitting that he's writing a Superman comic because he's honestly like the closest thing that I know to like Superman in real life. So just a genuinely stand-up dude, and I've been loving what he's been doing in Hulk, and so I hope that's a run that goes on for a good long time.
Oh, yeah, awesome. Shout out to Philip if you're out there watching. We love your work, man. Thank you so much for everything. But let's move on a little bit. I want to talk about Moon Knight. So
Yeah,
people who know me, who have followed me on Twitter and have even been watching our episodes, I have been praising the McKay Moon Knight since it began. It's been one of my favorite titles. So again, similarly to Hulk, when I heard that you're writing Moon Knight, I'm like, oh my God, again, the stars are aligned. The comic gods have smiled upon us once again. So
yeah.
I was super, super excited for it. I loved the first issue.
Thank
So
you.
first issue, we see Moon Knight. It's basically Moon Knight traveling through the Duat. And kind of the big thing of this issue, and kind of what I want to talk about a little bit, is you introduce Layla from the
Yeah.
Moon Knight TV show, and you're definitely more knowledgeable on this than I am. But besides, I think Darcy. So Darcy is in the Wanda book, but besides her, was Layla the first MCU character to come over to the comics? And basically, the question behind that is, what was that like to kind of take that on?
Well, as far as MCU characters to make it to the comics, there was Darcy,
Mm,
there was Agent Coulson.
yeah, that's right.
I'm sure that I'm missing a couple, but yeah, it was one of those things that my editor Tom Brevoort, he and I have worked together since I started at Marvel. He's really edited about 90% of my work. And so he and I think have a good dynamic. I think we're very much in sync on a lot of stuff. And so it's kind of fun being able to like play off of him a bit. Just being like, hey, what do you think about such and such? And he usually lets me run with whatever crazy idea that I've pitched him. And so the thing with Moon Knight is that I've been trying to work on with something related to Moon Knight for a while. He was originally on my wish list roster for Savage Avengers. And I had to kind of trim it down just to make sure that like we could fit in. I mean, 8 characters in a monthly is already it's tough. So like I pitched Rachel Cole Alvis, I had to cut her, I had pitched Moon Knight, I had to cut him. And so then I was like, okay, arc 2, I'm gonna do like a post-apocalyptic dystopian Moon Knight. That was kind of like that was the original idea. And then when we made our slight pivot, when we wrote Conan out, I was like, okay, we're going to go to 2099. And I realized very quickly that we couldn't fit in a whole other super team with our already stacked current super team. So I remember telling Tom at that moment, like, all right, I'm gonna with major regrets leave Moon Knight on the table. But if you ever have any opportunities to do something with him, I would love to take a crack. And Tom listened to me. And so he was doing an anthology for Moon Knight, Black, White, and Blood. And so he asked me if I wanted to do a story. And I did a quick story with Leonardo Romero called A Hard Day's Night, which remains one of my favorite things I've written at Marvel to date. I thought it was just a really cool kind of interesting take on a slice of life for Mark Spector and his alter egos. I pitched it as The Hangover, but Mark trying to figure out like, oh, there's like a tooth in my shoulder, who's responsible for that? Jake Lockley would be like, it was me, I fought vermin in the sewers, and why is my shoulder all burned? And Stephen Grant's like, oh yeah, I fought Crossfire in the financial district, he had phosphorus rounds, and then he loses a tooth. And he's like, what the hell happened? And Khonshu's like, oh yeah, I fought the Juggernaut, I just didn't think it was worthy of your attention. Like I thought it was like a fun story, and later Leo just did such a fantastic job. He's such a brilliant artist. I can't wait to read his Birds of Prey. So people, that story was pretty well received. And so last summer Tom hit me up again and said, hey, things are going really well with Moon Knight. We're looking to kind of expand. Do you have any ideas for a miniseries? And I was so excited. The first question I asked was, could we throw in the Scarlet Scarab? Could we introduce Layla Al Fawly into the Marvel universe?
Oh, so that was your idea.
It's funny because Jed and I both kind of pitched it independently of each other, not knowing the other one was doing something else. Because when from as I understand it, when Marvel came to Jed and said, "Hey, we want to do this extra sized issue 25." Sorry about that.
You're fine.
Ruby did not like the idea of extra sized comics. Apparently, Jed was approached to do the extra sized 25. He also pitched Tom saying, "What if we brought in the Scarlet Scarab?" And Tom Brevoort, in his infinite wisdom, was like, "Okay, we actually have this miniseries that's happening with her. Maybe we can kind of dovetail your stories together because they're coming out in the same month." And so that was kind of a cool way of going about it, was just kind of bouncing these ideas off of, Jed and I kind of bounced some ideas off each other, and we were able to find a cool way to slot in our stories together in a way that I think worked really nicely. And yeah, the way the rest of City of the Dead came into being was, I was like, Mark Spector is kind of like, I think of him as one of the more vicious fighters in the Marvel universe. Like Daredevil is all about precision, and Spider-Man is all about kind of improvisation. I feel like, and even like Punisher, you associate him mostly with hardware. I feel like Moon Knight is kind of one of those characters that's a little like Wolverine, but even Wolverine, he's got the claws; those are still his signature weapons. The thing with Moon Knight is that, like, he's carved a man's face off, like, I think historically, he's always been a very intense character, whether or not he's choosing to kill in any particular moment or not. So I thought that was like an interesting kind of through line. Like, I wanted to put him through his paces a little bit. And so I was thinking, like, okay, like, could we have him fight like mercenaries or other assassins? And I was just like, none of those feel like core to Mark. And what really kind of made everything click, I rewatched Man on Fire. With Denzel. Love that movie. And watching the scene, especially where Denzel's character is kind of like, he's just drowning himself in a bottle, and he's like toying with the idea of, like, I have a bullet, maybe I'll put it in my head, maybe I won't, and just feeling so sick with guilt about like the stuff that he had done in his past as like a military contractor. I was like, oh, that's Mark. That's 100% Mark. And that's when the story really kind of clicked for me, where I was like, oh, this is a guy with a body count. Let's make him face that. And I think that's something that's really been intrinsic to Moon Knight's character ever since his origin story. I mean, Dr. Alvaroon, like, that was, he dies, and then Mark catches a bullet, and then Mark is resurrected by Khonshu as his avatar. And that's the moment where he turns everything around and is trying to make things right. And so I thought that was like a really cool way to approach Mark, to take kind of like this Inception meets Taken sort of story of just like, this is a guy who he goes out every night and gets the crap kicked out of him because he knows he deserves it, and he's trying to like make good. And all right, all these things that you're just feeling guilty about in your mind, we're going to confront you with them. And so that's why we introduced both Layla, who, only the minorest of spoilers, but we meet her in Moon Knight 25, and we find out very quickly that's her last mission. In the Karnak Cowboys, she's killed in action, and so we will find out in issue 2 of City of the Dead, what has she been doing in the Duat all this time, and what has made her the Scarlet Scarab. But also, we're introducing a brand new Legion of the Unliving. I always, anytime there's like a cool Marvel concept that like nobody's done for a while, I'm usually like, Tom, can I use that?
I'm your guy.
And yeah, just Mark has killed a lot of people over the years, and we're going to be kind of facing all of them. And so getting to see characters like Black Spectre or Midnight, who I have a soft spot for Midnight. That was the first Midnight villain that I ever was introduced to, in the round robin arc in Amazing Spider-Man. Chainsaw from my very first Moon Knight comic in Marvel Comics Presents. We never saw him again. Just like a whole shipping container falls in his head. I was like, well, that guy's dead now.
Yeah.
Plasma. It was just one of those things that I was like, oh, Taurus, I remember that being like a minor controversy, is Moon Knight letting Taurus just die in a plane crash in West Coast Avengers. So I was like, all right, he's got a body count, and that's kind of cool to, Jed is building so much into Moon Knight's mythology, but this is a cool way for us to bring back like something that like we would think the door has been shut on forever. So we've got some really cool stuff coming with City of the Dead. Marcelo Ferreira is just doing just unbelievably good artwork. Every issue honestly looks better than the one before it. Sean Damian Hill is tagging in for issue 3, and I thought he did a really great job filling in for Marcelo. I couldn't be more proud of this book. I feel like this is a character that I've been kind of beating on Tom Brevoort's door for a while to let me take a crack at. And so the fact that he let me do it, and really there was no interference. I always kind of laugh when of course, I'll see people online speculating, being like, oh, that's the MCU synergy, they're making David use the Scarlet Scarab.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, I asked.
Yeah.
I asked for her. She's my favorite part of the Disney Plus show. And so I'm very happy with how it's come together, and excited for those Scarlet Scarab fans to hopefully come out in full force.
Hell yeah. Well, we're super excited. And you kind of honestly led perfectly into another question I wanted to ask you. So on our last conversation, I'm pretty sure we talked a little bit about the MCU and, how that influences comics and whatnot. And we actually just had the great opportunity to sit down with one of your friends, Jackson Lansing. And, they're doing Thunderbolts over there. So we got to talk to him about, how what you were just saying, the MCU synergy and like MCU influencing the comics. And he had a really great answer and talked a lot about, how some books are what they call more movie aligned, and so far and so forth. So I wanted to ask you kind of similar question related to Moon Knight. Obviously, like you just said, you wanted to bring Layla into the comics. So it wasn't like they told you to do that. But I am curious, obviously, this run is very what you guys call movie aligned. Do you have the Duat in there? You have Layla. You have even Amit even shows up, which I don't think she's playing a huge. I mean, who knows? Maybe she does, but she shows up. So, like I said, obviously this is kind of more movie aligned. So when you're writing that and you're kind of taking that approach, how do I word this? Like, obviously you want it to be its own separate thing, but is that in the back of your mind?
It always depends on project to project, and what's going on in that particular moment. For example, like my first arc on Avengers Unlimited, really the only thing that I kind of had in the back of my mind was, I was like, okay, I know She-Hulk's gonna have a show coming up, like it might be good to have her in the mix, and Captain Marvel's got a movie coming out, it might be good to have her in the mix. But beyond just sort of like having the character in there, I think I threw in I can do this all day, for Cap, but that was just that was me, maybe that was me indulging my own inner fan a little bit, because that was my first and currently only time having written Cap. I think for something like City of the Dead, there's a calculus you have to kind of run through. First off, knowing that this is not the main series, and sort of knowing like, okay, there may be people out there. I mean, Moon Knight fans should be reading Jed's run. It's fantastic. But I understand that there are going to be some people who might say, oh, like, reading something that's an issue like 26 or 27, maybe that's intimidating. And so maybe this mini series might be the way that they kind of dip their toe into the pond. And there are also people who the Disney Plus show is their only interaction with Moon Knight. And so then it's sort of the thing that I was thinking was, how do we kind of bridge that gap and sort of say, okay, you're aware of the show. Now let's kind of like show you like there's a whole mythology here. that we can kind of draw you into based on that familiarity. But I think it really depends on the project. I mean, for example, between that and say like Punisher, where like there's no movie draw for me on that one. That's very much like 100% blue sky, just coming up with something new. For me, it's always about just like, I'm always thinking, how do we kind of build a bigger table?
Yeah.
How do we invite new readers? How do we invite casual readers? How do we invite readers who might be feeling intimidated or just don't know what's going on and just might feel curious? And so that's always kind of the equation that I'm running in my head when I'm putting something together. But I do think that, especially as I've been sort of logging in more time at Marvel, I think that's a balancing act. I mean, you don't want everything to feel exactly like the movies, because we're sort of, I consider us the R&D department. Like the movies are drawing from us for future storylines. So it is a balancing act, of just like what's considered like the mainstream representation of a character versus like just kind of blazing your own trail. So I think Moon Knight, though, for this particular story, I felt like Moon Knight is having such a boom right now, because of that Disney Plus show and because of Jed's amazing work on the flagship title, that I wanted to bring something in for them, for those viewers, just to say, hey, like, the water's fine, come on in and join us, because if that'll lead more people to Jed's series, and anyone beyond, like that's a win-win to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just love that perspective. And with both of your guys' answers, I just really, because I feel like it's easy to get caught up online, and especially in like the nerd void that a lot of us live in, it's hard to kind of sift through the bullshit, if you would. And I feel like it's a big topic of conversation, especially right now, of like, oh, the comics are being too MCU, or it's influencing too much. And I just really love to hear like from you guys who actually do write these books, that it's not a contention point. And if anything, it's like you said, you're trying to use these stories for, like you said, I mean, who knows, maybe they make a Layla show in a year or so, and now you gave them the material that they can use, or as inspiration. And I just like how there's not like as much of a conflict as I think a lot of people in the nerd realm think that there is.
Right. Well, and also just, this is a good opportunity to, the MCU created like a really cool new toy, and like, yeah, why not bring Layla into the 616 mainstream Marvel universe? That, if Jed wants to use her down the line, or if somebody wants to come up with a Scarlet Scarab, series, or if anybody wants to use her, like we've now established this, and so now there's like a way to do that, and so I consider it additive, and I think that's the only way. That's the only way any of this stuff works. That's the only way that we're able to pass down a Marvel universe to our kids, is, and hopefully our grandchildren, is just like, we got to keep adding to it. And I totally understand the impulse. Like, look, I've been a comics reader since I was like 5 years old. I totally understand the impulse to be like, something's changed, I don't like it. I the characters were fine as they were. Why mess with something if it works? And I think that the answer is like, change has always been a constant in the Marvel universe, dating back to Cap's Kooky Quartet, or the all new, all different X-Men, or Steve Rogers and James Rhodes and Eric Masterson being the Captain, Iron Man, and Thor, down to the Krakoan age. I think change is always a constant, and I think at best, you get to add to the tapestry, and if not, then like you've tried something different, and it makes people then appreciate the character even more when the status quo returns. And so I'll never regret taking a swing on something and trying to add something new to the Marvel universe, because I think that's my way of paying rent in the house of ideas. you know, how do I add something new that it's not just remixing, it's not just kind of taking a new twist on the same old story. It's just also, how do we add something new to the mix? And that's something that I'm constantly thinking about, and something that has been influencing a lot of my work lately.
Hell yeah. Well, I mean, it definitely shows for sure. Because I mean, we talked about this before, but you're just on fire, man. Everything I've read from you, I've loved it. Like I said, I really love this first issue of Moon Knight. At the time that we're recording this, issue 2 comes out tomorrow, correct?
Yep.
So we got issue 2, and then it's 2 of 5.
Yep, 2 of 5.
Okay, 2 of 5. So, man, I cannot wait to see where you take us. Like I said, I love the first issue, and I want to also shout out, like you did as well, the art in the book is so good, and specifically the page when he first gets in the duat with like the splash. Oh man, I love that. It's so good.
Raquel Rosenberg, our colorist, really deserves a lot of credit for that, because that color scheme was all her idea.
Yeah.
I remember actually being very nervous when I saw it, just being like, "Oh, is it too much?" And Tom was like, "No, this is exactly right." And she's doing such a cool job. I mean, she's bringing in the same kind of color palette that she does on the main Moon Knight series, and I think she really kind of, I think, establishes a common visual language between the two books, in a really cool way. And she doesn't get enough credit. She's just really a terrific collaborator, as is Jay Leiston, who just takes Marcelo's art, and Sean Damian Hill for issue 3, and not only sort of kind of helps bring those two artists together, but also just like really takes Marcelo's beautiful artwork and just kind of brings it up to the next level. I've never actually worked with an inker before, and I was kind of like, oh, I've really started the bar really high working with Jay, because he those pages look really, really nice in his hands.
Yeah, I love it. So everyone out there, make sure tomorrow or whenever, if you're in the future and you're listening to this, make sure you go pick up Moon Knight 2, 3, 4, 5, all of them, because you're gonna love it. I love it. But we also got to talk about another book that you're doing. It's not out yet. I was lucky enough, we at the Sons of Mjolnir over here had the absolute honor of being able to read this one a little early. For anyone interested, you can check out my review of this book, and it is going to be The Devil That Wears My Face. So we were just talking about you dipping your toes into horror, and you did it with Hulk, but man, if you dipped your toes with Hulk, you took a full dive with The Devil That Wears My Face. This is a full-on horror book. You've described it as Face Off meets The Exorcist. And so this book is going to be taking us to 1740 Rome and follows an exorcist, obviously. And he runs into a little trouble when he takes on a new job. So I really, really love this issue. We were talking about it. I gave you guys a 10 out of 10 because it really was that. I really did love it. And it was very refreshing for me personally, because I mean, everyone knows out there, I read a lot of superhero comics. Like, that's my bread and butter. And whenever I get a chance to read something that's not superhero related, I'm always like, man, like, why do I not read more of this stuff? It's just very refreshing. So when I was reading this book, like I said, obviously I loved it, but one of the questions I had was, I feel like with a book like this, the research and the prep is a lot different than something like, say, Moon Knight or Punisher. So, like I said, this book takes place in 1740 Rome. So I would imagine, like, what does that research look like? Are you looking up like what's going on? Because it seems like in the book and in your writing, you're very conscious of what the world was like at that time. So I'm interested to hear, like I said, what was that prep and research like?
Boy, it was a lot of research. I did, I think, 2 months straight of research. I read up on every single pope from like the beginning of the papacy, and like I was reading up on the history of the Vatican, and then sort of general European history. That's how I landed on 1740. Was Pope Clement. He died early in 1740. and he kind of really represented the Vatican in decline. He was blind and bedridden for like quite some time before he passed. He was kind of like doing business from like his chambers, before like things got too bad. The Vatican, like, financially was in like real bad shape, and it was just kind of like, I think there was a lot of anxiety going on. And so that felt like the perfect kind of backdrop to do this horror story. We start off like trying to have some fidelity to history, and then obviously like things are going to go a little off the rails.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's a really, I've wanted to do horror for some time, and actually Devil has been in the works for almost as long as Savage Avengers.
Wow.
That's a concept that Chris Fernandez and Mark Lenide were talking about. It was after I guess it was late 2021, early 2022. So we've been working on this for quite some time, and a lot of that was just Alex Cormack, our amazing artist, is very high in demand. He's always juggling a lot of projects. And we were just like, okay, when does your schedule open up so we can get you to do 6 issues? But yeah, I've really been enjoying that book. You really kind of laid it out nicely that our hero, Father Franco Vieri, he's the Vatican's chief exorcist in a time where like exorcism is kind of frowned upon in the Vatican. It's sort of one of those like, you're probably not going to need this particular screwdriver, but like you want to have it in the toolbox just in case. And so Vieri is kind of dealing with a crisis of faith, in terms of his place in the church, and just kind of his future in it. And the Secretary of State says, hey man, we actually do need an exorcist right now. There's a Spanish nobleman, his son has been possessed by a demon called Legion, and so we need you to go to Spain, cure this kid, or cure this man, so like his father will like replenish our coffers. And so Vieri, long story short, the exorcism backfires, and so
you could say that
a little bit of a face-off story where the demon Legion winds up taking over Vieri's body, and Vieri is trapped in the body of this Spanish nobleman's son that everybody thinks is possessed. And so I'm really excited with how it's come together. Alex is just drawing some really fantastic work. We just revealed the cover for issue 2 on my Twitter yesterday. I saw this were out. So and it just, Alex is doing such a magnificent job on this book. I can't speak more highly of him. He draws like a machine. He's so fast, and he's got the horror bits down perfectly. He's got the acting down perfectly. The action looks spectacular, and he's just a funny, gracious guy to boot. So if he listens to this, I'm sure his head will get big. But like Alex is a one of a kind collaborator, honestly. I don't worry about him ever, because I know that he's going to deliver just magnificent work. And then Justin Birch, who he and I have actually worked together on a couple other projects, some shorts and some other stuff that hasn't been released yet. And he's just he's a great guy, so it's fun to be working with him as well. So it's different. It's very different from anything I've written before. I guess I'll leave it up to the readers to decide if this is bigger than Spencer and Locke was or not. But certainly it's the bloodiest book I've ever written.
You could definitely say that for sure.
Yeah, we have like a priest getting his head like smashed in like the first like 3 pages. We're really kind of, my mission in this book was to kind of balance out like the action elements, but also just to make sure that we always have like at least one cool horror thing, just that outright horror in it. And Alex really understands the assignment, and so he's drawing the hell out of this book, and I can't wait for readers to get to check it out. It's still in pre-orders. You can call your local comic shop. We've got 2 covers. We've got one from Alex Cormack looks amazing, and then Mon House, who's done variants on all my other creator-owned work. He has graciously agreed to do variants for at least the first 2 issues. So, or you can go on the Mad Cave website if you're a digital-only reader. They also have some digital-only subscriptions as well.
Yeah, definitely. Everyone, please go check that out. It releases October 4th, correct?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep. Week
October
before New York
4th.
Comic Con.
Yep.
So
October 4th. Go pick it up. It is amazing. And you kind of touched on something I wanted to bring up is I think what you guys did very, very well, both you and Alex, is the balance of horror and story. And I mean, everyone has their own flavor, but to me, something that I really enjoy about horror stories is when you obviously we want that action and we want some brutal stuff, but I like when there's like a line and it like we all know, I mean, you could think of a bunch of movies in your head, Saw or whatever, where it turns into like a gore fest. And I thought
yeah,
that
we're not.
yeah, I thought you guys towed the line perfectly between like the action and the violence is brutal for sure when it's there, but that's not what the book hangs on. Like what, in my opinion, what really sells the book and what really makes it engaging is the characters and the situation that they're in. So like the gore and the violence is just kind of an added bonus to that. So like I said, I thought
Yeah,
you guys towed that line very, very well.
I will say that I think this happens in a lot of books, but I think oftentimes villains can kind of get short shrift. And I feel like Legion is probably my favorite villain to write since Roach Riley was and Spencer and Locke Volume 2. So it's been a long time coming. And just he's such a fun character to play around with. It's Vieri is always, he's the responsible one. He's the super ego. And of course, that's the guy you want to root for. But like, Legion's the guy who just loves cutting loose. He loves his job. And like, he's kind of like an artist of mayhem and death in certain ways. And he honestly, I think, might have been like, Vieri's got the emotional beats, but like, Legion's just so fun to write. And
it's always
just
fun
kind of
being
watching,
a bad guy, right?
yeah, and just kind of getting to follow his arc. I think Legion was the one that kind of surprised me the most, in that like there are moments that he has in this that he's like, oh, all right, I just broke into the Vatican, now what? Like he's there's a little bit of like the dog that caught the car,
Yeah.
but he perseveres, he finds a way to one up himself. And but that dynamic with him and Vieri, it's like I think there's going to be a point where Legion's going to be actually happy to see Vieri, just to be like, oh, okay, like you were a challenge. I'm very excited kind of. So seeing Vieri and Legion have their respective rematches over the course of this series, those are some, I think, the more fun beats in the whole book for me.
Awesome. And that kind of I swear, man, you're like reading my mind today because you just keep leading into the exact questions I'm going to ask. But I was going to ask you that. So, in regards to Legion, so obviously, I know this is true for you, and it's true for I think every writer out there. And they say, write what you know, and write, from the heart and whatnot. So I'm curious with Legion, obviously this all comes from your head. And so what is it like to put yourself in like the shoes of a demon, I guess you could say? And like when you're writing Legion's dialogue, like can it get kind of weird, like putting yourself in like the mind space of a demon, or like how does that work?
It's very fun. I think it's because it's writing a villain means like you get to like temporarily kind of unshackle yourself from like the rules of civilization. Like I like to think of myself as a good person. And a responsible person. I try to be nice and kind and understanding for people that I run into, but like there are responsibilities. I even with my amazing kind of freelance work, like I'm still working all the time. I don't take days off. and so getting to write like a character who's just like, I'm going to do exactly what I want, and it is kind of it's the bleakest, kind of darkest kind of, I'm not going to say wish fulfillment. I'm not looking to
Yeah.
kill people,
Yeah.
but like there is, it's sort of the escape fantasy of like, of just like, this is a guy who like just gets to, he does his own thing. Like he, if anybody gives him guff, he gives, he dishes it out twice as hard.
Mhm.
And I think and he's got like a sense of humor. I think I will say he's the funniest one in the book.
Yeah.
And that's like, so it's kind of fun. I don't feel weird being in his headspace. Roach Riley was a little weird to be in his headspace, just because like he has like a philosophy and a code. But I
Mhm.
think Legion, it's just like he's got a mission, but like he's gonna have fun doing it.
Yeah.
And if anything, I think he's the guy who kind of keeps the book from feeling too heavy.
Mhm.
Because he's just he's just like just causing mayhem wherever he goes. And he is a little bigger and a little more over the top. And yeah, he's a fun villain. I already miss writing him.
Well, I can't wait to read more of them and discover
Yeah.
more of him. I'm super excited. I know you're planting some seeds in there, so I cannot wait to get to the end and, like you said, see Legion in all of his glory, if you will. And before
Yeah.
we get off of Devil, I wanted to ask you as well, speaking of Legion,
Yeah.
if this is a spoiler, if this gets into spoiler stuff,
I'll tell
then
you.
please tell me, and you can just be like, yeah, you'll see, whatever. But I am curious too. We were just talking about research and all that. Uh, is Legion, or was Legion written or at least inspired by someone or something in particular and like specific, or was it more just an amalgamation of just a bunch of scary demon kind of
Oh.
things?
Well, I certainly, there was inspiration from the biblical
Mhm.
demon legion, and that speaks to the kind of a fun visual iconography bit that Alex and I kind of put together, is that like the demon legion was known as basically a composite of like 1,000 demons.
Yeah.
And so we have that, like legion, we'll see, like you see his shadows all the time. It's like it's got like 1,000 like evil looking eyes.
Yeah, I was gonna bring that up to you. Was that intention? I
That was
really thought that was
intentional.
super creative way to like show someone possessed. And I was gonna ask you about that. Like you said, that was intentional because I just thought that was
Yeah.
very, very cool.
Yeah. Just to kind of like show that the
Oh,
possession.
okay, I
Um,
get it. I get it now. Yeah.
and of course, like of course, like Castor Troy from Face Off, huge influence. And I think that's part of the reason why I like the movie so much, is that like, you have this like stoic hero who's like trying to set things right, and that's fine. But then you've got like just this guy who like gleefully murders people, and is having so much fun in kind of this new setting. So yeah, that's I think a big influence there. Yeah, I feel like those are, I think, some of the bigger influences behind it. But yeah, I did some research on like just like the biblical legion.
Mhm.
And that there might be some payoff to that later on in the series.
Okay, okay, awesome. So yeah, everyone out there listening and watching, be sure to talk to your local comic shops, pre-order The Devil That Wears My Face. Get it in your comic shops everywhere on October 4th. I'm telling you, if you guys trust me on anything, on comic books and stuff, I'm telling you, you guys are going to really love it. But after The Devil That Wears My Face, we have another new book. Man, you're in high demand these days, David. So after that, we're going to be getting into, this was announced, I want to say like a couple days before Comic-Con, or like
It was announced
week or
during
so.
Comic-Con. It
Yeah,
was on my panel.
yeah. Well, you writing it, yeah, but the story, like the
Oh
story
yeah,
itself,
yeah.
yeah.
Teasing a new one. Yeah, it was the week before Comic-Con.
Yeah, so you're gonna be taking on the Punisher, which
Yeah.
oh man, I am so psyched about. I mean, we had an opportunity to talk a little bit at Comic-Con about it, so I do know a few things already, but man, hearing you talk about the series is just, it makes me so excited for it. for anyone out there who hasn't read the most recent Jason Aaron run, spoilers ahead, that ends with Frank Castle being Dunzo's. He is, I mean, no one in comics has ever gone, so who knows what's going to happen. But so then that opened the door for you to take over Punisher, and you are bringing not only a new Punisher to the universe, but a brand new character to the Marvel universe. So can you tell the people at home a little bit about that? Who is this new
Yeah.
Punisher?
Yeah. So our new Punisher, he's a brand new character. He's a former Shield Wetworks agent by the name of Joe Garrison. And Joe basically he hung up his spurs to pursue the call of family. And the problem is that someone just blew up his house with his family still in it. And because his record has been completely redacted, the authorities just think we can't find the husband. We need to bring in the husband. The husband is our prime suspect. And so I pitched this book as a John Wick meets The Fugitive, and that our first arc is going to be Joe's origin story as this new Punisher, trying to figure out like who set him up and why, and sort of figuring out kind of what's the bigger threat going on underneath the surface. And it's so funny, a lot of people were speculating like, oh, is it going to be this character or this character or this character? And I think the reason we're doing a brand new character is because just like the way that Danny Ketch wasn't somebody before he became Ghost Rider, or that Robbie Reyes wasn't somebody before he became the other Ghost Rider, or that Sam Alexander wasn't anybody before he became the new Nova or Miles Morales or Kamala Khan, or I think if you want to have a legacy hero that actually can stand on their own 2 feet, that isn't just a short-term a short-term replacement, it's got to be a new character. And for me, there was a lot of thinking that kind of went into it, because the Punisher, like, of course, there's a lot of political discourse around the character. I think it makes perfect sense, of just like, how do you responsibly tell a story with that kind of character in the year 2023, year 2024, and for me, I'm not there. I know there's been speculation of like, oh, the Punisher's not going to have like guns or anything. No, he's got guns. Like, he's got guns. He's got bullets. Like I promise you, don't worry about that sort of stuff. We light somebody on fire in the first issue. Like, it's fine. But I think for me, it's I how people talk about Batman as like an aspirational character. That's maybe a thing that I am kind of trying to pivot away from as far as Punisher is concerned. I don't want anybody to feel like they can walk into like a Walmart, and walk out as the Punisher, like that. That I think is the reason why I really wanted to use some heightened weaponry, some shield weaponry, but also it just gives us some cool little extra avenues that we can do, of just like, it's if Ethan Hunt from Mission Impossible became John Wick, is that we're able to kind of throw in a little bit of heightened gadgetry, just to let our Punisher do cool stuff. I think so. There, I think we're doing some fun stuff with Joe. I think the way that I had discussed it with Marvel is, the Danny Ketch to Frank's Johnny Blaze. But I think in my mind, I was thinking a lot of also the way that like Cassandra Cain was a foil to Bruce Wayne, and that like particularly the way that Cassandra moves in any particular scene, like, that she's not superhuman, but she almost might as well be, because she's so fast and precise and coordinated. And that was kind of the way that I felt that Joe could stand out as our Punisher, is that he's not the guy, like, of course he's got guns and he's got weapons, but that's not really all he's about. It's about the gun fu of it, about the choreography. It's about, if you've ever watched a John Wick movie, like, this is a guy who, like, it's not just a guy who's like going in guns blazing. It's not a guy who's just walking in with a shotgun. This is a guy who, 10 people rush him at once, and he's sort of darting and dodging between all of them taking them out one by one by one. And it almost looks like this kind of like beautiful, scary choreography of death. And that's some kind of the way that we've been approaching Joe. But yeah, at the same time, we're trying to tell these stories that, we're not looking to sacrifice any of the intensity, any of the attitude. Like I'm a fan of the Punisher. I pitched Frank for Savage Avengers. And that's how I found out that he was going to be doing stuff with the Hand and his own journey. I pitched Rachel Cole Alves, wasn't able to fit her into the roster. I eventually got Punisher 2099.
I was gonna say you technically did write Punisher.
And that handling of that character is what got me this gig. So I think there's really cool stories that can be told with the Punisher. I think another interesting thing about Joe as a character, and hopefully it's not spoiling too much, but when you first meet Frank Castle in the pages of Amazing Spider-Man, like this is his first appearance, but this is not his first rodeo as the Punisher. Like he's been kind of marinating in this for a while. And he's already like racked up body count by the time that we meet him. And that's the cool thing about Joe, is that like we're really joining him like in the immediate aftermath of all this. His origin is very much about finding answers about what happened to his family. And I think that's a cool way to kind of get to know a character from the ground up. And also to kind of find new angles and avenues to evolve the Punisher's mission. And I think the way that I've sort of envisioned him is that, I think it was Jerry Conway who talked about the Punisher being an indictment of society, that like a society that needs a Punisher, that requires a Punisher, like, there's something wrong. And I don't think it was a coincidence that Frank Castle debuted the same year as the movie Death Wish. His miniseries came out on the heels of the Bernard Goetz trials. That his popularity surged during the Reagan years and the war on drugs. And I think this is a really cool and unique opportunity to revisit what does the Punisher's mission mean in today's society. I don't see this as a political punching up or punching down. I see it as just like who's the Punisher fighting for in this sense. And I think there's a way, and I think there's a way in that forward that we can make the Punisher a character that doesn't sacrifice any of the qualities that have made the Punisher such an enduring character. But like I say, how do we build a bigger table? How do we invite more people to the table, and in a way that the Punisher doesn't feel like, you can only appeal to one group of people, but only at the expense of another group. That's something that we've been really trying to address in this book, is just how do we invite new and returning Punisher fans to the same table and deliver a book that everybody will like. And I feel really confident in that. And I think a big reason for that is Dave Wachter, the artist on the book. Dave is a powerhouse. It's one of those things. I'm shocked he's not a household name yet. He's done work on Spider-Man 2099. He did an issue of Ghost Rider. He's working on Planet of the Apes right now. He did a run on Ninja Turtles for a while. I was always thinking, this guy got pigeonholed as like an anthropomorphic guy when he draws humans. But I can tell you, having seen his art coming in, it might be the most beautiful book I've done at Marvel to date.
That's
Dave is just
saying something.
He really is leaving it all out in the field, and I think that's the thing is we're both fans of the character. We're both excited to kind of try something different with the character. And I know anybody who's concerned about like, people hate blah 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 blah, and I'm like, no, I don't hate the Punisher, and I can tell you that Dave doesn't. We're really Dave inspires me to kind of up my game because he is really leaving it all out in the field, and I can't wait for readers to get to see how amazing that this book looks. And Dave is really doing so much of the heavy lifting because, like I said, so much of Joe's appeal is it's the fight. It's how does he move through any sort of situation. And the way that I had described it was, he's got his weapons, but he's also just got the environment around him, and he's going to use that to kind of improvise very fun and unique ways to kill people. Half the fun of Joe Garrison is you can throw him in an office building or a restaurant or an abandoned factory or anywhere else, and you're going to figure out, like, okay, how is he going to use this to fight his way out? So I'm very excited for readers to see what we have planned for Joe Garrison as the Punisher. And we've got some real fun stuff ahead of that opening arc as well. I've pitched Tom Brevoort so many villains. And we've discussed some cool stories that speak to the legacy of the Punisher and the history of it all. Just fun stuff coming.
Oh yeah, I have no doubt fun stuff are coming. And I wanted to ask you, so with the Punisher, you're just saying, growing up, I was a huge Punisher guy. I loved the Punisher. I mean, a lot of people do. That original movie, I forget the actor's name, but
Dolph Lundgren?
Well, okay, yeah. So I guess the original actor, Dolph
Are you talking about
Lundgren.
Thomas Jane?
Yeah, Thomas. That's who I'm talking about. When I was a kid, I loved that movie. And so you touched on this already a little bit, but I kind of want to ask just a little bit deeper. So through the years, Punisher has kind of went through a lot of different kind of ups and downs, if you would, and especially in the day that we live in now, a lot of people think of him as a very kind of controversial character, if you will. And I know for me, like being a fan of the comics and of the Punisher, I mean, just for example, we don't have to get into politics and all that, but when I see a police officer with the Punisher thing on there, I want to throw up in my mouth. It's just, I hate that. And I just, not really, you don't have to comment on that specifically, but the question is, so taking on this job, and like I said, you touch on this a little bit already, but was it more, I guess, nervousness or excitement to in the nervous aspect? Was it nerve-wracking to take on, like I said, this kind of controversial topic that is very prominent today? But on this flip side, was it also exciting to be able to change that? And I know for comic readers out there, we know that that's not what the Punisher stands for, but a lot of people from the outside looking in might not know that. So was it exciting to take on that challenge to kind of reverse that?
I think you really hit it on the head. I mean, I saw it as a responsibility, as somebody who has grown up a Marvel fan, who's grown up a Punisher fan. I mean, I love, Rick Remender's run. I love that run. Greg Rucka did a fantastic job. Jason Aaron's Max run, I adore, as I did the Garth Ennis run. Some of it is also just the Punisher, and you see it in, say, something like Garth Ennis's run, where the Punisher makes a lot more sense when he's not in a shared universe with a bunch of other characters. I think Greg Rucka might be the one who tackled this the most. Is that Frank Castle's not going to be running around for very long without Spider-Man or Daredevil being hey, this guy's a mass murderer,
Yeah.
And so it does kind of strain the believability of the shared universe a little bit, and also makes it a little harder to include the Punisher in these sorts of things. But I do think, just the real world applications of it. Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things that the character has certainly come to represent some things that we've all been reckoning with as a society. I mean, the Punisher skull is about extrajudicial vigilantism, and so I think the apprehension that you feel and I feel, seeing people who are supposed to represent law and order wearing this, whether it's as a sign of intimidation or whether it's sort of outwardly wish fulfillment of it'd be great to not have to follow the rules and not have to, go through the red tape of due process, and wouldn't it be just great to kind of, cut some corners and I think that's something that as a society we've all been kind of grappling with. Like you see it in the headlines, and so that is I saw it as a responsibility when Tom Brevoort approached me, that I was like, yeah, like that's something I do want to take on, because I think that there is a world that you can have this character mean something, and mean something to a wide readership. That like I think there's always there are certainly, I think, common problems in society that, I don't think having the Punisher running around shooting people from the inner city is like that's not something that I have any interest in writing. I don't think that's something that is appropriate in the year 2023, 2024. And also, like, there's really, I don't know how often you want to see like Frank shooting mobsters. Like I don't know.
It's been done a couple times, I think.
He's done it a few times. Like I think this felt like the perfect opportunity to just try something new. Like it's just real blue sky, clean slate. And the way that we've kind of established our new Punisher's mission, I'm very excited for readers to get a sense of what that looks like, because I see it very much as, going back to what Jerry Conway said, like, yeah, there are things wrong in society. And rather than it being, oh, well, like the legal system goes too easy on people, because I don't think that's accurate in this day and age. I think if anything, it's there are people out there whose society is completely abandoned, is completely overlooked. And those are the kind of stories that I'd be really interested in saying, like, if the law won't help, maybe this guy will. And I think that could be a way forward in a way that is still true to the Punisher, that still allows him to kind of tell these kinds of adventures, but in a way that isn't punching down, that isn't at somebody else's expense. And I think that's something that, if you're a fan of the Punisher, I would hope that you would want more people to be a fan of the Punisher, and more people to appreciate the character, not to kind of turn it into something exclusive, or something that is at the expense of somebody else. And that's always been my mission as a comics fan, as a comics writer, as somebody who's been a comics evangelist my entire life, is that I want as many people at the table as possible. And so if you're a returning Punisher fan, we'd love it if you gave us a shot. If you're somebody who hasn't been interested in the Punisher, we're trying something new, we'd love it if you gave us a shot. But ultimately the goal is to kind of just build a bigger table, and do so without sacrificing any of the intensity, any of the action, any of the attitude that's made the Punisher endure for the 50 years.
Man, I love it. And that's such a beautiful, beautiful answer. I really love how you broke that down for us. And before we talk about a little bit about, what you are going to be working on next, what's coming, down the pipeline, going back to the kind of research topic that we were talking about before, I'm also curious. So with the legacy character, obviously it's not Frank Castle. So
Right.
Is the approach that are you reading a lot of old Punisher stuff, even though it doesn't have to do with Castle? And does the research more so take on, I guess what you were talking about is more so like what the Punisher means as opposed to Frank Castle himself? And also, did you look at other legacy characters for some like inspiration? I mean,
Yes.
everyone knows I'm a huge proponent of Jane Foster Thor. You mentioned yourself, Kamala Khan, Miles Morales. We know that you have a kind of actual personal history with Miles since you
Yeah.
reviewed his very first issue. So
Yeah.
you're no stranger to legacy characters. So I'm interested, like I said, what was that research process like going into Joe? And like
Yeah.
I said, what kind of influences were you looking at during that?
Sure. Well, yeah, like you said, like I reread all of Remender's run on Punisher. I reread all of Greg Rucka's run. That was Rucka's was the first one I reread. I reread Jason Aaron's Max run, and a good chunk of Garth Ennis. And I read his original appearances, like dating back to like Frank's very first appearances, even pre miniseries. And then I read the Stephen Grant miniseries, and Steve honestly has been very supportive and welcoming. He and I have corresponded because he's also a big Black Knight fan, and having read
Oh, okay.
Avengers, he and I kind of started corresponding, and then I ran into him at San Diego Comic-Con, and we were talking a little bit about this Punisher, and just a really smart guy, a really supportive and talented guy. So yeah, I'm trying to think of some other stuff that I've read him in. I had actually recently reread the Daniel Way Thunderbolts that he was in prepping for Savage Avengers. I know there's more that I have read that I'm just blanking on, but yeah, and Matt Rosenberg's run. I knew I was blanking on something. And also a good chunk of Becky Cloonan's run. And so it's one of those things. For me, it was just kind of reading how are the different ways that they've approached the character, of the Punisher, just to kind of figure out like, okay, what's been done? Are there any things? Is there anything in there that I think is important to bring with me? Is there anything that I should steer away from because it's already been done? For example, like Greg Rucka was very interesting that he didn't do the war journal narration, which strikes me. I know Rosenberg didn't do it as well, but or didn't do it as much. Matt Fraction's run, that was the other one I read. But Rucka not doing the war journal stuff was very interesting. But I think that only really works with a character that's been established for as long as Frank. We are going to do war journal narration to kind of get in Joe's head, because I think that's very important to get to know him as a character, and kind of get a sense of just like how he operates and how he like moves through a space. Let's see, what else did I do some research on? Yeah, I mean, a lot of it was also just kind of figuring out what are some like common threads to the Punisher. In particular, just like what kind of villains are out there. I mean, Frank, I love Frank Castle, but I will say the biggest disadvantage of a character like that is he does not really have a rogues gallery.
Yeah.
He tends to wipe them out. And not to say that we're not going to have Joe put some lead into some deserving people, but like trying to think like there might be some punishments out there worse than death, and is there a way moving it forward beyond our initial origin story? Is there a way to like have some villains that like we could bring back that people won't feel like, oh, like Joe let that guy off easy? Like, no.
It might be worse.
They're gonna be like no. Let me put it this way: anybody who lives to fight Joe Garrison a second time, they will absolutely wish that they had not lived to do that. Like Joe is gonna wreck some people massively, and yeah, it's some fun stuff planned, but I think even just like the villains that I've pitched Tom Brevoort, he seems to be very cool with a lot of the villain concepts I've come up with so far. And yeah, we have one down the pike that I think is kind of like it's a villain concept I'm surprised hasn't really appeared in the Marvel universe yet, but I'm excited to make that one happen. So I think that'll be maybe somewhere in the second arc, if we can make that happen. But yeah, it's just like I said before, I think change is the only constant in
Mhm.
Marvel. And I think for me, being able to add something new to the table, um, that felt like a responsibility, and I felt like something that I certainly have not taken lightly. Um, because like, how often do you get to just kind of start from scratch like this? It's
Yeah.
very rare. And I understand that in certain ways we've trained our audiences to be distrustful of that.
Mhm.
I think there's, with the rise of the internet, I think, and entertainment press, I think we've tried to I think we've inadvertently taught readers to try to anticipate stories rather than enjoy them.
Mhm.
And also to kind of lean so heavy into the continuity, and that everything has to be connected, and that every issue has to kind of not just mean something to a character, but have wide span repercussions for an entire universe.
Mhm.
And I think what a legacy character means is it is kind of a refutation of that. That you're starting kind of from scratch. You're doing something brand new. There's no predicting that.
Mhm.
And I think that can understandably kind of rub longtime readers the wrong way, in that they have an idea of what the Punisher means, and
Mhm.
that it and they have kind of a fairly conservative spectrum in terms of how far afield can you go. And a legacy character, you kind of get to write your own playbook, and you
Mhm.
do so with, you do so with respect to what's come before, and you try to incorporate what you can thematically. But I mean, just look at somebody, say, like Kamala Khan, for example. I mean, how much did she really have in common in terms of core concept to Carol Danvers? Besides loving her as an influence.
Yeah.
And I think we're not going quite as far afield with Joe Garrison, but just the idea of, you can't predict where it's going to go.
Mhm.
And that's something that I'm trying. I really want to kind of maintain that mystique a little bit, for our readers, and to just know that, like, to give readers permission that you don't have to try to anticipate us.
Mhm.
You just, like, all we want is for you to show up and enjoy the ride.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think that is something that Joe Garrison, I think, really represents the way that Danny Ketch represented that for, Ghost Rider in the 90s.
Mhm.
And so that's, I think, the message that I would try to pass on is, you know, we got a really fun action-packed story coming for you guys, and just stay tuned. Don't try to get ahead of yourself. Just give it a read, and I think you might enjoy what's coming.
Hell yeah, just strap yourself in and enjoy the ride. Like I said, I cannot be more excited. And even when you're just talking about it, it kind of not reassured, but reestablished in my mind that so Frank, he's a soldier, like straight up through and through, like brutal kind of soldier. But Joe, he was working with Shield, and like you kind of explained him yourself as like Ethan Hunt meets John Wick. So even just that distinction alone, to me, I think is super interesting, and it
Yeah,
makes me very excited, because while even if, which I know you're not, but even if you had like Joe doing the same thing that Frank's doing, like the same motivation and whatnot,
yeah,
just that simple difference, I think, makes them completely different and makes Joe a very compelling character, like I said. And I love the term that you used, the gun fu of it all.
yeah,
And I cannot wait. I know for a fact that we're going to see some very creative and kind of unique kills and or stunts from Joe that I'm super super excited to see. It's going to be
yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, we're really leaning heavy into that sort of, into what's the coolest action that we can kind of throw into this.
Hmm.
And I think that's something, Joe, as being sort of this ex-Shield Wetworks guy, I I know that I saw a few people being like, oh, he's a cop. I'm like, not, no, no.
Yeah. No,
If
definitely
anything,
not.
he's on the run from
Hmm.
the police, and we'll see more of that actually from very early on in our first issue, and that'll kind of be kind of a simmering subplot through our first arc.
Hmm.
But I think it's maybe to speak a little bit more to, just like I don't want anybody to feel like they can walk into a Walmart and walk out as
Yeah.
the Punisher. I think that felt very important to me, was to establish Joe as someone with a very unique set of skills. And I think that's something that both kind of differentiates him, like, from Frank, who, like, Frank is the guy who goes in guns blazing,
Hmm.
and this guy is like moving like a surgeon. But it's also just like, I don't want Joe Average on the street to think they can be the Punisher.
Yeah.
I will say I don't want that.
Hmm.
I think, you just look at the headlines and there's like so much like gun violence out there that like that doesn't strike me as like a responsible thing to promote,
Hmm.
as like somebody who's working for one of the biggest entertainment companies on the planet.
Hmm.
Uh, and I think this is a way to kind of thread that needle, that like, this is a guy who like has been trained. He's really, it's like the razor's edge,
Hmm.
just kind of skill. And you know, you as a normal person cannot be the Punisher,
Yeah.
but this guy who is insanely trained,
Hmm.
and just has like this crazy set of skills as a former assassin,
Hmm.
that guy can do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we see Tom Cruise hanging on a plane and climbing the Burke Khalifa, but you're not seeing me do that shit. So,
Exactly that.
yeah,
Like, I think that's a great way to frame it, is that like, just like you wouldn't think of yourself as Ethan Hunt,
yeah.
but it doesn't mean I don't enjoy the hell out of Ethan Hunt movies.
Oh, hell
So
yeah.
that's I think a slight but I think important pivot, that I think I would hope does not diminish the enjoyment of the Punisher for any readers. I mean, I love Spider-Man too, but I'm not. You don't see me trying to climb up walls.
Yeah.
Uh, I
I
haven't done
mean,
that since I was 6 years old.
I would say I can't honestly. I don't know if I can honestly say that. I
Yeah.
used to.
um, but I think that's. I just want to say that I think there's a way to tell a Punisher story that, like, I think doesn't sacrifice anything important,
Hmm.
while still just kind of telling it in a responsible way in the year 2023. And that's something that we've put a lot of thought into, because yeah, we're trying to, just like we talked about with Moon Knight, of trying to kind of bridge together two different sets of fandoms,
Hmm.
of the people who know the character versus the people who don't know the character but are curious. We're trying to do that in a way that like it's cool for everybody,
Hmm.
that like nobody should feel ashamed, nobody should feel weird. Um, we're offering you a Punisher book where I hope every single person who reads it is excited and feels cool and is excited to be a Punisher fan.
Oh yeah, I love that so much, David, and I cannot wait. Like I said, cannot wait to read it, to devour it, to read it over and over again. And I cannot be more excited. But speaking on being excited, I know that you can't talk about anything really yet. There's nothing officially announced, but
Sure.
it's kind of similar to our last conversation. So you've done a bunch of Marvel work. I mean, at this point, I feel like you've written almost everybody in the Marvel universe, pretty close to. You've you've dunked your head into horror, full dive, and like I said last time, that was kind of the thing that you were talking about. You want to dip your toes. So instead of talking about maybe a specific project that you're working on, what's the next kind of thing that you would really like to dip your toes into? And I don't necessarily mean like a specific character. I mean like from a story and a narrative standpoint. What's something that you would really love to tell or maybe have an opportunity to craft together?
Yeah.
What would that be?
Boy, there's definitely, there's definitely some sci-fi. I'd love to tackle some more sci-fi. I feel like that's kind of the major food group in
Mm,
terms of comics, and sort of somehow I've built a career without really dipping my toe too much into it. I think Savage Avengers kind of being the most sci-fi thing that I've written to date, but I can say like Fareed Karami and I are working on Grand Theft Astro together. And he's doing some terrific work on that. So we'll hopefully do a Kickstarter for that in 2024. I've got another series, a YA series, actually, I guess middle grade, that we've got a good critical mass of artwork on. So we're talking with publishers now about that one. And then there's a few other kind of sci-fi ideas that are sort of percolating right now, and in various stages of development on that, and continuing the OZ. We're going to wrap up that series with our next Kickstarter. Ruben Rojas is working like hell to get us all the artwork for that, and he's working tirelessly to kind of get that done. But I think, I don't know. I mean, Marvel's been so good to me, and I love working there. I've been sort of talking with them, about sort of what next projects will be beyond working on Punisher, which we're in production on the first arc now, and I'm sort of working ahead on that currently. And then just also kind of finishing up production on City of the Dead, and finishing production on Devil Wears My Face. Those are all written, but just as the art comes in, doing letter passes and art notes. I'm trying to think what else. But I every so often, like I'll pitch Tom or CB or Ricky Purden, like there are certainly characters out there that I'd love to tackle in the Marvel universe that either I've only tackled for a little bit, or haven't tackled at all yet. And knock on wood, I think I get along really well with Marvel, and so I hope if I stick around long enough, I'll get to check everybody off the bucket list. I will say, I mean, I'm not working on him, so I can say that. Like, I mean, Jed's doing a fantastic job on the run right now, so I hope he never leaves. But if that day ever does come, I'd love to throw my hat in the ring for Doctor Strange. Love that character. That's sort of been the bucket list Marvel character. Love to do more with Iron Man. I played with him a little in Avengers Unlimited. But it's the cool thing is just getting to work with the people who are working on those books. I just emailed Jed actually it was a week or so ago, the most recent issue of Doctor Strange, introducing the history of General Strange. I told him I thought it was my favorite thing that he's written probably since Black Cat. And to the point where I was like, Jed, can you walk me through how you did that? Because that was like really well crafted, and the stuff that Jerry Dugan is doing on Iron Man, and the cool way that he's cross-pollinating it with the X-Men books right now. I got to actually, I rode back on the train from San Diego with Jerry, so we got to talk for a while, and he's just a real salt of the earth, generous guy, very creative and gracious. So I think that's been kind of my favorite part about working at Marvel, is slowly but surely like getting to meet my fellow writers. Philip T. Johnson, a lovely guy, Jackson Lansing and Colin Kelly, two amazing people. I met Teenie Howard very briefly at San Diego, and I totally understand why everybody loves her. She's such a sweetheart. Jody Hauser, wonderful person. And it's just and Zeb Wells could not talk about a nicer guy than Zeb. And it's kind of nice getting to both learn, from my peers, but also just to kind of to get to know them. When I started in the industry, Mike Martz was the one that said, "You don't walk into the Yankees." And I think it's only been over the course of the last year and change, that I have felt not just like I'm playing for the Yankees, but that I get to play with all my fellow Yankees. And that is really really cool. Steve Orlando, that's another name that I should throw out there because that guy is just a wonderful human being. And if you're not reading Scarlet Witch, if you're not reading his work on Iceman, really great books. So I wholeheartedly recommend anything Steve's working on, and just and yeah, and meanwhile, I just, I got to thank the fans, because I think without, it took a village to get here, and it takes a village to stay here. And I think if it wasn't for such a passionate and vocal coalition of fans and retailers and press, I wouldn't be able to do this job. And it's the best job I've ever had. It's one that I hope to be working on, until they lower me into the ground. And so every day I'm grateful. I'm grateful for the fans who like my work. I'm even grateful for the fans who don't, because they read it. They took the time, they spent their money. And if something doesn't grab them, I hope they'll give us another shot, for something else down the line, because I like to think that no two books read the same, especially mine. But it's just, I don't know. I continuously feel grateful, and that's the thing that kind of gets me out of bed every day to get back to the script.
Well, I gotta say, as a fan, we are grateful for you, man, and we're grateful for all the great work that you've been putting in. And you're talking about feeling like you're stepping onto the Yankees with your fellow Yankee teammates. I think you have firmly established yourself as a part of that team, and not only a part of that team, but one of the heavy hitters of that team. And everything you've been putting out is great. Everything that we've talked about today, I could not be more excited about it. And I mean, the sky is up, my friend. Like I said, you're on fire, man. The fire has not dimmed one bit since you started. So with that, I do have one more question. We're talking about all the other fellow Marvel writers and all your colleagues and whatnot. I'm interested. Obviously, everything is research in some form or fashion. Like everything you read inspires you in some kind of way. But I want to know, like, what are you just reading for fun? Like, what is really like catching your eye? And like, so I'm talking again, like, obviously you're reading, Punisher stuff, Moon Knight stuff for, different projects. I mean, like, David's sitting down to relax. You got Ruby on the chair next to you. What are you cracking open just for fun to read?
Boy, so I've recently been reading This Is How You Lose the Time War. Really enjoying that one. Such an interesting way of writing and structuring. So that book is fantastic. And I next to my docket is They Both Die at the End. That looks like a fun one as well. It's funny. I mean, talking about sort of in comics how we've kind of trained people to read the tea leaves. When I'm reading for fun, especially when it's not a comic, I try to really just base it off of like, I try to go with as little as possible. It's sort of one of the rare bits of entertainment these days that you don't get spoiled. Like I've gotten to the point where like I don't read reviews of movies before I go in, because I just want to kind of experience it in the moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think, as far as the comics that I'm reading, Swan Song is fantastic over at Image. 2 issues in, and it's unlike anything else I've read in the direct market currently. Let's see what else. I read All Against All by my buddy Alex Packnadell. Really terrific work on that one. I've been really enjoying Brian Bendis's new Fortune and Glory. I guess it's Fortune and Glory 2 that he's been doing on his Substack. I thought that's been very interesting. Bendis is somebody who, honestly, if you ever want to be like, if you're an aspiring creator, I would wholeheartedly recommend not just signing up for Bendis's Substack as well as Scott Snyder and James Tynan's, but I would also just kind of recommend reading Fortune and Glory. And Fortune and Glory 2 especially, Bendis is getting into his origin story as a creator, and I think that's very inspiring and very accessible. and his writing is writing for comics book is similarly engaging for what else am I reading? What have I read lately? Phil Kennedy Johnson, I've been reading his stuff on Action. I've been reading his Hulk, which is fantastic. The X line in general, I love reading the X line books. I would read them even if I didn't work for Marvel. I always say that
there's so much too that you have no shortage of X books to be reading.
Krakoa got me through the pandemic, so I feel a lot of affection and admiration towards everyone in that crew. Boy, it's like, I every time somebody asks me this, I'm like, oh, I'm totally gonna regret this later, because I will have. I know I'm very excited for Petrol Head, that Rob Williams book. Rob Williams, I think it's Rob Williams. Coming out from Image, that looks great. Yeah, and then beyond that, I'm trying to just kind of anything I consume, I try to just get some brain food in it, like Mr. Robot, giving that a rewatch. Love that show. I just rewatched The Fly this weekend. Hadn't seen that since I was like in high school. And it was very different experiencing that as an adult, but also as a creator. I appreciate it a lot more now. I've been in a weird 80s horror kick lately. I did The Fly and Child's Play as like a double feature.
Oh, okay.
And then beyond that, I think sometimes it's just like, finding a movie, finding a game, just to kind of unwind a little bit.
Yeah. Turn the brain off from storytelling stuff.
Yeah, just give yourself like a couple hours to just kind of to not have the engine running. I was playing Streets of Rage 4 the other week. Or there's the Ninja Turtles game, the side scroll beat 'em up, and I don't remember what it's called.
Oh, I actually just downloaded that a couple days ago. So
it's fun. It's fun. And then I'd love to play Baldur's Gate, but I worry that Baldur's Gate is going to be one of those games. It's like Fallout or like Elder Scrolls. Like I banned myself from playing those games because I like them too much.
Too sucked in.
It really scratches the same itch as writing a script, but with obviously not having a script in my hands. So I it's probably a good thing that I don't have a PS5 to try that game anytime soon. But yeah, I mean, honestly, yeah, it's just, for comics especially, it's like I've been really, and I know it's kind of sacrilegious to say it, but it's like, it's not to say that I don't want to be informed. I definitely want to be informed, and I read just about everything from the big two every week, as well as like creator-owned stuff that's catching my eye. But I'm trying to kind of work myself out of this. I got to anticipate. I got to read the tea leaves. I got to figure out, because I think that you're setting yourself up to do that. You're setting yourself up to not like a book because you've already prejudged it. You've already said, you've figured out these are the parameters that if it falls within this very narrow parameter, I will like this book. And if it doesn't, I'm gonna be real mad. I've been in the same boat. I have done this. I got my start in comics journalism, but I think the potential downside is that it makes us less engaged with the work and primes us more for disappointment and frustration rather than just enjoying a work for the work. And that's something that I really hope readers can kind of come away with my next few books, is just like, there are stories that are worth telling. And they don't have to have wide-ranging repercussions on X, Y, and Z other thing, that they can just be fun stories. And it's not to say that, and I think doing that actually makes the world-shaking event books that much more exciting. Not every book is expected to do that. So I'm very excited for people to get to see what I've got coming out, and and I'm excited to kind of keep reading what my peers have coming out, because I'm a fan first and foremost. Even if I wasn't writing these books, I'd be reading them.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the enthusiasm that I hope comes through in the work, and hopefully that enthusiasm is contagious to the readers.
Well, it's contagious to me because I am super enthusiastic, and like I said, all this I really think. I mean, like you, same as you. I've been a comic fan pretty much my whole life. Say comics basically taught me how to read. That's how I learned to read, is from like flipping through the pages of comic books. But I really do feel like we are in a very good space in comics right now. And I don't necessarily mean like from a business standpoint, I just mean from a storytelling standpoint. I feel like both the big two and I mean stuff that's coming out from the indie sector, it's just we have some really great stories coming out right now. And I feel like it's a really great time for comic books right now. So, like you said, it makes me excited that we're living in this time right now with all these great stories, great creators. I mean, there's so many. I was just thinking about it. We were talking about Moon Knight comes out. City of the Dead #2 comes out at the time of this recording tomorrow. But man, I was looking at the list and there is so much coming out tomorrow. Like there's so many great books hitting the shelves even just tomorrow. I was like, man, my wallet is gonna be it is gonna be hurting. But
I appreciate it.
yeah, like I said, it's just I feel like we're in a really great time of comic books right now, and your peers, people over at DC, and all the indie creators. It's just a very lush place for storytelling right now.
It's I think you nailed it on the head. Is that there's no shortage of cool stuff for
Mm-hmm.
people to read, and that's what really excites me. Is just kind of figuring out what's the new thing.
Yeah.
And I think you're going to see a lot of creators taking some big, wild swings to try to chase that down.
Mm.
Because I think that's what we owe you as readers, is that we owe you our best work to the best of our abilities, but also just we owe you the biggest swings that we can think of. And that's what I've been trying to deliver with City of the Dead, with Punisher, with Devil That Wears My Face, is that we're trying to take some big swings, and hopefully people respond to that, and even hopefully they do. If they don't, well, we're just going to keep on swinging.
Yep, keep on swinging, keep on trucking. Well, David, thank you so much for being here today. It has been an absolute pleasure. It is always so much fun to meet up with you and get to talk and nerd out. So before we get out of here, though, tell all the people, where can they find you? When can they pick up all these amazing books?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter, Blue Sky, and Instagram at Pepose D, or David Pepose Comics on Facebook. You can visit my website at davidpepose.com, or subscribe to my newsletter at bit.ly/petnews. Beyond that, you can pick up Moon Knight City of the Dead. It'll be #2 will be out at comic shops everywhere Wednesday, August 23rd. The Devil That Wears My Face will be out October 4th, I believe. Punisher comes out November. It's coming out November 8th.
Okay, awesome. Oh, a little sooner than I was expecting, than I thought it was. So that's awesome.
So yeah, call your local comic shop. You'll be able to find me. I should be at Baltimore Comic-Con in September, as well as New York Comic-Con in October. So bring copies of any of my books. I will gladly sign them for you.
Awesome. David, thank you again so much. I know I speak for myself and the other Sons of Mjolnir, and when we say, again, we are just so excited for all the things you have working on. You were gracious enough, like I said, you were our first ever interview, and you have just been so nice and gracious ever since then. You're really I consider you a good friend, and I just cannot be more excited for everything. And again, thank you for always taking the time and coming and nerding out with us.
It's my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. And for all you guys out there listening and watching, that's going to be all that we have for you today. Hopefully, we'll be able to get David back once some of these books get going, and we can come back and reconvene all about the Punisher, Devil That Wears My Face, and whatever else. Maybe you're listening to this in the future and something else has been announced that we don't even know about yet. We hope you enjoyed this episode. But for now, we will see y'all next time. May all your stacks be fat, and make sure you stay hydrated out there.
I can do this all day.